Well, what I'm trying to do is still stay nice.
Yeah, but you're getting way off course.
You think I'm getting close now? Well, it's time to start. Thank you, ma'am. So good to have you tonight.
Thank you.
That preacher, would you leave me alone? We're in the book of Titus, and I better get started before we get shot. And I do not have a... Chad and DJ were in the upstairs this morning, and I said something about it's tougher than thunder, and they like to lost it up there. They'd never heard that. And I told DJ the other night that Daddy beat the starch out of me. Y'all ever heard that? And DJ liked to, listen, he got on the floor and just rolled. I said, DJ, if you'd been in my case, you'd have rolled, but you've been rolling because you're hurting so bad you had to roll. But he said, preacher, where you get all that stuff? I don't know. I just picked it up through the years. Sometimes I say things to get people to listen. It's the best way in the world to communicate with people because it keeps them aware that you're looking at them. And if not with your eyes, with your heart. And it keeps a lightness to what's going on. Sometimes when you preach tough stuff. And it's just hard to keep it all together because it really is. You keep a balance where people can at least have a breath of fresh air every once in a while. But we're in Titus in chapter 2, verses 9 and 10 tonight. We're looking at the character of a healthy church. And sometimes I wonder if we're really getting what we need to get. But I hope we are. I really do. Because we're going to have to look at it sooner or later. And I hope it's not later because we're almost too late now. And we can hold on to it. Titus is a little book that addresses the issues of how the church does effective evangelism. I've watched this all through my life. My Dad was probably Dad was not the greatest preacher I've ever heard. But my dad was the greatest evangelistic preacher I've ever heard. Now Dad would preach and God would use him in a tremendous way. The anointing just seemed to have always been on Dad when it came to preaching and evangelistic. And people, souls be saved, lives changed, hearts just drawn. It's such a wonderful time to know that. But Titus is that kind of a book. And I'm convinced now more than ever before that if the church ever does her job, it's because every person in the building, every person that's a member, will be a witness, will be that light that shines in the darkness. And if you've got a dud, that's going to show up. And one dud can take care of a lot of lights. One bad apple in a barrel can ruin the whole barrel if it stays there. And that's exactly what's taken place through the years. But we seem to have moved into a culture where the means and the motives and the methods in itself to lead people into the church is endless. I don't think I've ever seen... people would do anything. I know of a church 2-3 years ago now that mailed out about 20,000, and it may have been 30, but I'm going to say 20. I've got some family in the church is the reason I'm saying this. And I asked them one day, I said, did y'all have a good crowd for Easter? They said, we had 10,000 saved. I said, do what? Now, that'd be in the newspaper. And I said, tell me about this 10,000. And I'm talking to somebody that I know and know them well. And they said, oh, yeah. I said, we mailed out thousands of cards and asked the question, are you a church member? Have you ever been saved? Would you like to be saved? If you would, mark this card. And they marked the card and sent it back in. Under that mark, it said, we will not harass you, we will not call you, we will not look for you in church, but you're saved. Now, you've got to understand that's part of the mechanism of a land that we live in. And much of what we've done in the church is open the doors to the church to anybody, anywhere. It is tougher to get in the country club than it is to get in the church. And there should be higher standards for the church than the country club. But we have resourced ourselves to the place that we feel like that we need the church to grow to where people think we're really doing something special. It's easier to build a building like this than it is to fill it up. Anybody who agree with me on that? I'm just telling you, you can get the money. You can do that. I've watched it for years, and it's an amazing thing. The scope of means and methods are wider and greater than any point in history, in the history of the church. The means and the methods are wider and broader than they've ever been. People can almost say anything and do anything and still believe. If you listen to Franklin Graham shares the plan of salvation and has a prayer on the commercial. But it does not invite them to join the church. Now there's a difference in what he's doing and what I'm talking about. He is sharing from his heart the plan of salvation, what it means to be saved, what it looks like to be saved, what it takes. And then he says, here's a prayer that will be a model for you to pray if you'd like to be saved. And then you call this number. Now what they do when you call that number is they bring you in to discipleship and how to know where you're saved or lost. That makes a difference. But much of what I'm seeing today has nothing at all to do with understanding whether they're saved or not. Dr. Daniel Henderson says there is a different connection between extraordinary prayer and church health. George Barner, and this goes back to Greg, you quoted him this morning, George Barner, he says, demonstrates this by saying, North America is the only continent in the world which the church is not growing. North America is the only continent in the world where the church is not growing. Now, I can probably give you a bunch of reasons why that's true, but that is true. There has been a consistent decline in church attendance over the past decades. Consistent decline. Just one year after the other, 1 year after the other, 1 year after the other. 2/3 of all pastors say the greatest need is a spiritual revival in the church. The hardest thing you get now for people to do is have a revival in the church. That's one of the toughest things. Most young pastors don't have revivals. And I'm telling you, we're moving away from... There's two other reasons. Number one is it's so hard to get the people to come. And you've got to have some kind of unusual event to get the people to come to start with. And when you have a church revival, there'll be a group about this size that'll come, but the rest of them won't come. And so out of embarrassment, pastors quit having them. They just quit doing it. Unless we're going to have some huge event with some well-known preacher and some outstanding groups to come in and sing. And most of the time the singing brought more than the preaching did. And that's what you have to do. And that's what takes place in the day that we live. And most of it is events. Outreach Marketing, a Christian research and advertisement firm, has documented the following. 500 billion, that's a B, billion dollars has been spent on ministry in 15 years. In those 15 years, 10 of those years, the church declined by 9.5% and the population increased by 11.4%. That's not doing well. We're looking at going the wrong direction. We're talking about what needs to take place. 85% of all churches are either stagnant, stale, or declining. They've reached their peak. That's it. 15% that's growing. Of that 15%, most of those churches growing by getting members from other churches. It's not by lost people coming into the church. It's by churches swapping membership, just back and forth. And so when you look at these things, you have to stop. It is apparent that we have never had more money, technology, talent, formal training, leadership textbooks, or educational resources than we have today in this time in the history of the church. Yet, our impact here in America continues to diminish. Never been a time we've had more opportunity than we got today. I mean, I want you to know, listen, growing up as a boy, probably in just a little town about this size, watching through the years and how God would use the old brush arbors and home Bible studies and old poor uneducated preachers, and God just used them and used them and used them, and now we've got everything you can think of or dream of, and find ourselves ill at ease when it comes to watching the church grow and mature. When one looks in the New Testament, what is the strategy for evangelism? Is it the media campaigns, the billboards, the promotions, or is it the large events that we have from year after year after year? Is that really what it is? See, I've had the tents. We've had hundreds and hundreds in those tents, and used the tents many times. Listen, we've had wild game suppers. We've had civic center revivals. We've had all these open air settings, and I've enjoyed those things. But here's what you've got to stop and realize. 90% of all the people that sit in church, even in here tonight, and I could prove this just by asking some questions, 90% have been led to Christ one-on-one, a personal touch. Not in the events, not in those times where things were normal, but they were led to Christ one-on-one. Now here's my question. Have we stopped witnessing? Have we stopped sharing Christ? Have we stopped living in such a outstanding way that the world sees the light of Christ in us, and they sense the salt that preserves in that person, and out of seeing people live it out, they want to be saved? It's changing. The primary strategy for evangelism was a personal witness, one-on-one, lifestyle evangelism. Lifestyle evangelism. That means that you get up every morning with your heart saying, God, can I win someone to Christ today? Father, can I shine before somebody today? Can someone see my light today? Will someone see my light? Or will I act not in a way of Christianity, but in a way of the culture, and the culture has taught me? And if I do win someone to Christ, will they meet someone who says they're Christian but acting like the devil? Because see, oftentimes when you share Christ with someone, before they get down the street, they run into somebody that says they're Christian, but they're acting like the devil. And I want you to know there's a two-edged sword. On one side, there's salvation. The other side is destruction. And we're meeting that kind of a setting. The New Testament strategy for evangelism was to live what you preach and preach what you live. That's about the clearest way I know how to say it. It's reality. We can put First Baptist Church of Samson on the bottom of every billboard, advertisement, mail out peace to every member of the church. But if there's anyone living an unholy life in this church as a member of this church, I want you, it'll have a bearing on every one of you. And yet we seem, I don't know where we've blocked it out of our minds, or it just doesn't bother us anymore. We've lived through it so long and for so much of a length of time. But if we were to take all the money Now, just go through America, think about it. Take all the money that's on the billboards, advertise in churches, all the mail-outs, all the advertisement, and we've advertised at Rehoboth, and we've had all this stuff. I've done it all. Wouldn't it be better to take all that money and put it in missions? Now, when you say that, people say, we don't know them. Wonderful. Wonderful. Then you can't waste the money. Because it's a waste of money to put all that stuff on a billboard and have somebody in the church living like the devil. Say, I love you, Brother Travis. Y'all looking too serious at me now. On the other hand, if you will live the life and keep your life in an attitude of holiness, then you can take all that money and keep it and put it in missions and say, God, here's something that you can use somewhere else tomorrow. It would be a wonderful thing. Can you imagine how many millions of dollars you could put into missions? This is what Paul was saying to Titus on the Isle of Crete. Paul was saying, if the leaders would lead, and if the people that are in the groups of older men, older women, and older or younger women and younger men, and those who were servants, if they would live what they said they were, you can save all that money, and it would be a change. The strategy for evangelism is either a personal witness or a powerful sermon that touches them personally, because it's the foolishness of preaching. It's not foolish preaching, but the foolishness of preaching that leads souls to be saved. It's a reality. You touch them. 90% will be because of a personal touch. 10% will come from other ways. Let me ask, how many of y'all think, what percent you think come to church because of the preacher anyway? Somebody want to guess? I'm not going to embarrass you, I promise you. I don't think I will.
5%.
Who said 5%? Roger. Where'd you get that? It's anywhere from 3 to 5% ever come to church because of the preacher. It's like 35% of those who sit on the pews. 15% because of the parking. That's what you start looking at. That's what you have to ask yourself. And when we say the greatest need is revival, what it is when the church comes together in extraordinary prayer. And the one thing on Wednesday night was just praying. Most people just kind of run it by and take it for granted and say, boy, I wish he'd preach on something besides prayer. And listen, there's nothing more important than prayer in a church than prayer. Listen, you can look at a church and tell what a church is going to do by the heart of the prayer of the people. I mean, you can see it. It's there. It always will be. And when people have no need or no desire, or either prayer is not that important to them, brother, I'll promise you it'll have a bearing on the life support of the church. And the church is on life support now. And listen, prayer should be in the centerfold of all that we do. And that's what we're saying. All the media, all the concerts, all the events, all the religious activities and promotions, all the civic centers and the conference centers, listen, they will go by the wayside when it comes to people living in the church that are not living holy lives. Lives that are living in scandals and sin and disgrace to God, I promise you will make more effect and have more effect on the church than anything else. In any given time. It is so important. If we say God is Savior, then we need to demonstrate the saving power of God in our lives. Francis of Assisi was out hoeing his garden one day. Now, I didn't know him personally. Did any of you know him personally? I didn't know him. He was like back in the 1300s. He was hoeing his garden one day. And he said this. He said, somebody walked by and said, Francis, let me ask you a question. If you knew you was fixing to die right now, what would you be doing? He said, just what I'm doing. They said, no, you wouldn't. He said, yes, I would. He said, I'm doing what God told me to do right now. See, if you are where God wants you to be, you may be hoeing a garden. You may be fishing. You may be walking down the road. But you need to be where God wants you to be at the moment that He calls you home. Wherever that is. And our heart should be in tune with God, that God would keep us in that kind of a mode. And see, to me, playing with grandkids, spending time with your family, being able to stop and look at days like Memorial Day and remember those as go. Nothing wrong with those things. But don't miss the light that you need to be and the salt that you need to be, preserving those around you, because there's a world outside that's dying and going to hell. And we need to stop and look at it and look at it clearly. The German philosopher Heinz said, and I quote, "Show me your redeemed life, and I will be inclined to believe in your Redeemer." Show me your redeemed life, and I'll be inclined to believe in your Redeemer. Well, that's reality. I mean, one of the things that stopped me dead in my tracks, hurt my feelings too. I want you to know that. It hurt my feelings. I started out the door one day in church. I was being spiritual. Any of you ever been spiritual before? In fact, I'd been to the altar that day and said, God, would you forgive me of all this junk I've been in? And I got up and started out the door, and my daddy was standing at the door, and the president of the Coca-Cola company was standing at the door with my daddy talking. And when I got to the door, the president of the Coca-Cola company looked at me, and he said, Brother Free, I want you got one of the sorriest sons I've ever known. And I thought, well, you idiot. Hello? Now, you just got to catch this picture. Made me mad, but hurt my feelings. But it also embarrassed me. I wanted to slap him. But what it did, conviction fell in my heart. Wow. That man's lost. And he's looking at me and telling me how sorry I am. Here's what he was saying was, I wished you'd live where I could see Christ in your life. Did you hear me? And let me tell you what, there's a world around Samson that says we need to hear Jesus. We need to see Him in your lives every day that you live. That little setting, it's edged in my heart like that iron pin and that diamond point. And I won't ever forget that setting. It edged something in my heart. It drove something home to me. And when you live in an ungodly manner, calling yourself godly, I want you to know there's a world outside watching. And in hell, many of them are going to lift up and say, if you'd have told me, if you'd have stopped me, if you'd have lived the way you should have, it'd have made a difference in my life. That's the kind of people that Paul is talking to. Paul has said in verse 16 of chapter 1, he said, they profess that they know God, but in their works they deny Him, being abominable and disobedient, and unto every good work reprobates. The word reprobates means that they were tested and found counterfeit. They were tested and found counterfeit in themselves. It's a reminder. And so Paul is looking at Titus and saying to him, son, you need to understand that that's the kind of folks that we're dealing with. That's what we're dealing with. That's what we're looking at. Evangelism at its best is when Kenny, it's when Craig, it's when Roger, it's when you ladies, all of you ladies, when you stop and your light shines every moment 24/7. Wherever you go, whatever you dress like, however you talk, there's a lost person somewhere watching you in every given moment to see how you're going to respond. And that's what Paul is dealing with. And Paul is saying to Titus that there is another group that we want to look at, and they're the servants in verse 9. He said, exhort servants to be obedient unto their own masters, and to please them well in all things, not answering again, not prolonging or stealing, but showing all good fidelity, that they may adorn the doctrine of God, our Savior, in all things. And notice the word all things, everything. They're looking, they're watching. The word exhort means to beg of you, or to plead with you, to urge you. It is to urge earnestly, by advice, by warning, by admonishing strongly, just admonishing you strongly with all that you can, and encouraging you with every ounce of energy. It is to come to the place that there is an urging of earnesty inside. It's almost like, listen, you can't wait to exhort, to lift up, to talk kind or gentle to someone. It says exhort servants. The word servant it's to exhort the servants, or it's to urge the bond slave. It's to continue urging slaves to practice. It's to tell slaves, this is how you need to live. When we talk about servants, Paul called them bond slaves, employees. The master is the owner, or the employer. It's what we're talking about. We're talking about a job relationship. We're talking about the owner. We're talking about the one that he hired, the one that came. My dad always said, and I love this, Dad used to tell me, he said, son, give a man a day's work for a day's pay. He said, don't you ever steal on the job. You make sure that you give a day's work for a day's pay. I said, Daddy, what if you don't pay? He said, that's not the issue. The issue is that you promised the man that you'd work for him, and said if he does not even pay you, then you work that day. You don't have to go back, but you got to work that day. You made a contract with him that you'd work that day. When I was in Graceville, Glenn and I she was working, making $60 a week. I was not working. And we had a little trailer there that I moved her house, and she didn't know it was gone for about a day or so. And then she come home one night and it was gone. And she said, where's my house? I said, about 350 miles down the road. And she started crying. And I said, well, baby, get in the car and I'll go show you where your house is. And she cried all the way. But you got to understand, I found me a job. I'm going to school. I found me a little job. And B. Pelham, I went by B. I said, B, you need anybody to help you with carpentry? And I was not a good carpenter. In fact, I'd carpentered very little in my life, but I had to beat with a hammer and I could hit a nail, that kind of stuff. He said, can you work? I said, yes, sir. I said, I may not be too good at it, but I can work. And he said, okay. He said, I'll be here tomorrow when you get out of school. I said, okay. So I worked. We worked a week. I figured at the end of the week he'd probably pay me. He didn't. Went home. Glenda said, you getting the money? I said, no. She said, you know we're broke? I said, yes. She said, well, we're going to eat for supper. I said, I got 2 bananas. You want one? Think about it now. It's life. And we sit there and eat a banana and watch television. I worked another week. End of the week. He's not said a word about money. I meant not one word. He ain't even hummed it. You know how you whistle sometimes when things are going good? He didn't even whistle. Nothing's going on. I worked another week. And I thought to myself, this ain't going to work. I mean, I wonder if I'm working free. It's the 3rd week. Into Friday came, and he said, Travis, we finished that job up this afternoon. Said, I just turned into the lady, and she gave me a check and said, I just told her to write you out one and write me out one. That way we'd just get half of whatever we'd done. And he paid me the same thing he got. And I made a good living being a carpenter under the best carpenter that has ever been. His name was B. Pelham. Now let me tell you why B did that. B said, I was watching you work, and said you worked. Said, yeah, I've seen people that work better or that could do better job, but they wouldn't work any harder than you did. And he said, the job is not the key. The key to it is, are you willing to work? See, the key to the church is witnessing. It's, are you willing to witness? It's not can you witness, are you willing to witness? And see, we've come to the place in the church, we just expect, have you ever heard anybody say in the church, well, they know where the church is? You ever heard? I'm not asking you, did you say it? And I know some of you have. But the bottom line is, they know where the church is. But they will never come until you and I invite them. They'll not come to Jesus. They'll not come to the church. But if you and I will spend some time in a personal touch in their lives, they will come. And that is live a life that shines. If that light shines in the darkness, sooner or later, you're going to lead somebody out of that darkness and they'll come into that marvelous light. And when they do, this illumination of God's Spirit begins to deal with their life. You can't save them and neither can I, but God can. And He said, as an aged man, as an aged lady, as a young lady and a young man. And then He moves into the servantry, into the slaves. And you say, well, when you say slaves, preacher, what do you mean? If the master was a heathen, that means your boss is aggravating as a $11 bill. He's just hard to deal with. He is cold. He is callous. The responsibility lies on us as servants, as workers, as employees, a heavier load than we've ever had before. Because if he does not know Christ, you need to shine brighter than you've ever shined to where it'll touch his life. King James, in the King James Version, you know why he had it translated? He knew Christians would work harder than the slaves would. And the King James Version was translated for the very fact that old King James knew he'd get more bang out of the buck if he'd get all them folks that were slaves saved. If they'd read the Bible, they were better people, they were kinder people, they were easier to get along with, they worked harder. That may not be true anymore, but that was true in his day. It's a reminder to all of us. Christianity was something special. The real task of a servant, a slave, an employee, a workman was to show the master what a Christian could be. And that responsibility still lies in our lives as Christians today. That's what our job is. That's what we're to do. We're to work in a manner where others can see Christ in us. Not go to work and gripe and grumble every day because we didn't get everything we wanted at the point that we wanted it. If the master was a Christian, oftentimes those that worked for them felt that the owner owed them something special because they both went to the same church. That's not true either. So you've got to look at where you're going here. You've got to understand. He said, exhort. That means you're going to advise, you're going to warn, you're going to urge them earnestly to do the right thing. But you're not going to embarrass them. You're not going to try to make them listen to you. Slaves means one who is under the bondage or authority of another. It's a reminder to all of us what we need to be. What we like to do, are you ready? What we like to do is live under the good old boy system. I'll scratch your back if you'll scratch mine. Hello? That's just where we are. And I want you to know it's the most devastating thing in the world to Christianity. It is the one thing that destroys more than anything else. It's a reminder. There is no worse advertisement for the church than the good old boy system. Never will be. See, in these days, in the days of Paul and Titus, the Roman Empire lived off of slaves. All their labor was slave labor. I mean, every bit of it was. And it's kind of like going to California and talking about taking all the immigrants out. You're taking all their labor out. And I'm telling you, listen, they got cheap labor and they like their cheap labor, and you messing with the money side of it now. And there's a war that goes on. That's where the war comes from. Slaves make up the total labor force of those in California. Many slaves were mistreated, stolen from, beaten, jailed, killed. That's the wrong kind of setting for them. But there were other slaves that found themselves their owners respected them, they loved them, they gave them land, gave them houses, they gave them the ability to dig out of slavery and come to the place that they were left to the individuals. In fact, when it came to the end of the 50 years, God set a regulation in place in the Bible. See, the Bible does not condemn slavery. Now, y'all may think it does, but it does not. The Bible does not condemn slavery. But the Bible does regulate such slavery. And at the end of 50 years, everyone was to release their slaves. Many of those slaves stayed with those owners because they had given them houses and land and let them work and crop. We call them sharecroppers. My dad was one of those. Sharecropping, that's what they became. And they were honest with one another, and they loved each other. They were part of the families. They would listen. They could find themselves growing together. And there's a reality to it. The owner's respect was very important. Slaves were allowed to marry and to have families. That's called a freedom. They were secure. They found themselves. This passage does not at any point condemn slavery. Slavery is regulated by the Bible, and they found themselves being free. This is really all about Christianity, witnessing. In a witness for Christ to a lost and dying world. Beck's translation says in Colossians 3:22, it says, "You slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything. Don't serve them only when they are watching you, as if you meant only to please them, but seriously because you respect the Lord." Make sure that slaves are slaving, not because you're watching them, but because God's watching you. If you're going to be a good employee, you need to do it because God's watching you, not your boss man. My boss man, I was a Class A electrician, and C.E. Nix was my boss man. And he would get in his little truck, and he would drive out of sight, and then he'd walk back through the woods to see what we was doing. And I caught him doing that one day. I caught him doing that, watched him. And so every time he'd leave the job, I'd go over and sit down. After about 3 weeks of that, he come by there one day and he said, "Travis, can I talk to you?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "It's almost like you watching me." I said, "I have been." I said, "If you can't trust me to work, I'm not going to work. But if you'll trust me to work, I'll work. And I'll work as hard as any man you've got. But I'm not going to work for a sneak or somebody that cannot trust me." See, there's got to be a mutual agreement in the slave and the employee and the employer. There's got to be a balance in that. But that's important because what we're talking about in this passage is the reality. In Ephesians it says, "You slaves must practice obedience to your earthly master with reverence and awe, with sincerity of heart, as you would obey Christ." So you serve your master the same way that you'd serve Christ. Now people don't see that anymore that way. And they don't see giving a day's man a day's work for a day's pay. They don't see that anymore. I was a job steward for 7 years. And I remember I was working in Birmingham Byproducts. And this old man told me one day, he said, "Preacher," I know I wasn't a preacher then, not at all. But he said, "Boy," he said, "you need to slow down." Said, "You're going to work yourself out of a job." And I said, well, I'd be lazy then. He said, oh no, said you in the union. And I began to really watch as a job steward. And there were people that used the union to keep their job. I think unions are wonderful things, but they can be the most destructive thing in the world. So you got to balance. You got to balance. And see, anytime I say that, you can always, there'll be some that'll say, yep, and others say, no. And that's the one who's in it and one's out of it. And I want you to know there's nothing bad about it, but there's not anything good about it when it comes down to destroying the workforce. You and I should be different. We should work because God put it in our hearts to work. That should be what we do. And every person sitting here, no matter what age you are, you should work in your own way, in your own abilities where you are right now. But there needs to be a balance. We live in that way. Many employees will work hard if the boss is watching. But if he's not watching, when the cat's away, the mice will play. That's just the way it is. And so you begin to deal with this guy. Paul said to Timothy, let as many servants as are under the yoke count their own masters worthy of all honor, that the name of God and His doctrines be not blasphemed. And they that having believing masters, let them not despise them, disregard them, or look around them, because they are brethren, but rather do them service, because they are faithful and beloved, partakers of the benefits. These things teach and exhort. Make sure that we do it right. That's what Paul's teaching in Titus. He is saying, make sure that, listen, if you're in that place, you need to understand if you're working. So I want to give you 5 characters, and then I'm going to back off for tonight. I'm going to give you 5 characters, qualifications for those who are employees, marks of a very good employee. First, you are to be submissive. That means to be obedient unto your own master. You're submissive. When you think about the word submissive, it means obedient. Obedience is doing what you're told to do, when you're told to do it, with the right attitude. Now, I do real good to those first 2. The last one I have to work at. Obedience is doing what you're told to do, when you're told to do it. I don't have any problem with that. But sometimes with the right attitude is what gets me most of the time. It's just tough because sometimes it's just aggravating. And so you find that submission means to yield to the action or the control or the power of another. It's saying in itself, listen, submission literally means to put yourself under the protection or the authority of someone else. Whether it's a wife to a husband, whether it's an employer or an employee to an employer, doesn't matter. If you're in the service, here's what it says to the service. Listen, submission reminds us very clearly that we are under and in the line of authority. He says, get in line up under the authority. That's what it's talking about in service. Saying to us that's what we need to do. To be submissive is a military term that says, I'm going to get in line and under someone else. That's what you do. And I remember as a man, when I went in service, it was they cut all my hair off. I had pigtails. I was a cute little old boy. They cut all my hair off and they gave me breeches to wear and a pair of boots to wear. And then they'd like to run me to death. And the bottom line was I was under the authority of someone, and they would holler at you. Have you ever noticed that? How many of you were in service? Did they holler at y'all like they did me? They hollered at me. Everybody get back in line, Free. Free, do you know your name? Y'all know my name. They call me Donald. My name ain't Donald. My name's Travis. Well, my first name's Donald. I don't answer to Donald. You do now. See, we have forgotten what authority really is. And in the church, Paul is saying to be submissive, to be obedient, to be subject to someone else. It's putting yourself in. We are to be submissive. If our master is a difficult person or a hard-working person or a person that's hard to live around, we're still to be submissive. That's hard to do. That's just hard to hold to. The employee will live the way God asked. If the employee will live the way that God asked them to live, then you will be a witness for God in that setting. And I guarantee you will. Secondly, you are to be excellent. That says to you and I, a reminder. He says, and to please them well in all things. You're to be excellent. You're to work hard. You're to do your very best. Now, sometimes that's hard for people to do. The excellent work you do should not be just to receive a promotion or money or a higher position. I get so amazed at people. The only time they really get it down and get it on is when somebody's going to say, I'll give you $2 extra an hour if you'll do this. And they'll work like a Trojan. They should be working like a Trojan before the two ever came. But they don't. But you give them extra money, promise them an extra promotion, and they'll just go above and beyond. The extra worker you find yourself doing is to excel to please the Lord. It's not about you, it's about God. And we forget that this is about God sometimes. If you're working, you're to do your best. Listen, if you're working, you're to be obedient. Number 3, and I love this one, not answering again. My wife argues with me all the time. I'm sure yours never says anything. Oh, Neil, I know better.
I haven't had going around yet.
Look like a merry-go-round, son. I'm telling you. You're not to be argumentative. Not to talk back. Not to come to the place that you contradict. Probably more than that, what you've got to understand is this. Many people, the bigger picture would be for any employee to not only speak again, but to try to change the master's plan, or to come up to the place that change the order or the wishes of the master. I learned early in life that I'm better off if I leave things the way they are, do them the way you told me to do them. I may have a better way, but one day when I'm in charge, I'll do it my way. But when you're in charge, you do it His way. When the master's in charge, when the employer's in charge, you do it His way. And I've seen people absolutely destroy their ability to do anything trying to argue with those who were in charge. Now, I will never forget one day I was working on a switchboard, and there's 2 engineers sitting over there. I'm talking about sharp as tacks, college graduates, had all the accolades that they needed, and they had been working on this little switchboard for about 2 weeks. And I saw an old boy from Jasper, Alabama walk by there and said, if y'all change those 2 wires, it'll work. He's dumber than dirt. And they looked at him and said, you just get on back out there in the yard. Well, when he left, they changed him 2 wires, and guess what? It worked. I've seen it, but can I share something with you? That's not your job, is to make things work. Your job is to be a good employee to where your light will shine for Jesus. You're not on the job to tell your boss how to run the business. You're on the job to tell your boss about a God in heaven that saved your soul and changed your life. And see, everybody wants to be the boss.